I made an accidental mistake. And the alien woman's reaction shocked me. HFY. Jack Harrington stood nervously on the edge of the observation deck, looking out at the planet below. It was the first time he'd been assigned to a mission of such importance: diplomatic relations between Earth and the distant Zarhak system. He had read all the reports, studied the alien species' customs, and memorized their protocols, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. The Zarhak were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and their strict, ancient traditions. They were a proud species, and anything less than complete respect could lead to disaster. He glanced down at his uniform, straightening the fabric one more time. His heart raced. As an engineer, Jack had always been comfortable working with machines, solving problems and fixing things, but diplomacy was different. He wasn't used to dealing with emotions or delicate customs. And here, with the eyes of the entire Zarhak delegation on him, he felt completely out of his element. The shuttle landed smoothly, its gentle hum filling the cabin. Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. The door opened, and he stepped out onto the landing platform, greeted by the bright sun of the alien world. His mission was clear: assist the Zarhak in repairing their failing communication systems. But what was clear was how Jack, an ordinary human, would fit in with a species that had been around for millennia. As he walked through the grand hall, surrounded by Zarhak officials, his thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice. "You must be the human engineer, Jack Harrington." Jack turned to see a tall, striking figure. The alien woman was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was a deep, almost metallic blue, and her eyes shimmered with an unsettling intensity. She stood with an air of confidence, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. "I am Zira," she said, her voice smooth and rich, yet carrying a weight that made Jack's knees feel weak. Jack quickly snapped to attention, trying to mask his discomfort. "Yes, that's me. I'm here to assist with the communication systems," he said, offering a polite smile. Zira's eyes seemed to pierce right through him. "I know why you're here, human. I've been briefed." She studied him for a moment longer than was comfortable. "You'll begin your work soon, but first we will have a small gathering to mark the beginning of our cooperation." "Of course," Jack replied, his voice tight. He felt the weight of her gaze, like she was sizing him up, trying to figure him out in a way that made him feel exposed. He had to admit, there was something intimidating about her. But then again, she was the leader of the delegation, the one responsible for making sure everything went smoothly. He had to trust her. The gathering was held in a grand chamber filled with towering pillars, each one carved with intricate symbols that Jack couldn't begin to decipher. The room was filled with Zarhak diplomats, each one dressed in flowing robes that gleamed with metallic threads. The atmosphere was heavy, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Jack felt a bead of sweat form on the back of his neck. He was surrounded by beings whose entire culture was built on respect, honor, and ancient traditions. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and the entire mission could be jeopardized. His stomach twisted with the thought. Zira stood beside him, her presence both commanding and calm. She spoke to the crowd, her voice carrying across the room as if it were both a command and a promise. "Today marks the beginning of our alliance with the humans," she said, her voice warm but firm. "We will work together to strengthen our ties, share knowledge, and protect each other in the face of greater threats. May our partnership be fruitful." The room responded with a chorus of agreement, the crowd nodding in unison. Jack tried to blend in, but every movement felt like it was under a microscope. He caught the gaze of a few Zarhak diplomats, and their eyes flickered over him with an almost predatory curiosity. He forced himself to look away, focusing on Zira's steady presence beside him. She turned to him then, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Are you ready to make your first contribution, human?" she asked, her voice laced with something Jack couldn't quite place. "Absolutely," Jack replied, trying to sound confident despite the gnawing feeling in his gut. He took a step forward, but as he did, his foot accidentally brushed against a low pedestal that had been placed in the center of the room. It wobbled slightly before toppling over with a loud crash, sending a ripple of shock through the gathering. The room fell silent. Jack's face flushed with embarrassment. He looked up to see Zira's reaction, bracing for anger, disappointment, or even disdain. But instead, she was smiling. No, grinning widely. Her sharp teeth flashed in the dim light as she tilted her head, almost as if she found the entire situation amusing. The diplomats around the room shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to this break in the formal atmosphere. Jack stood frozen, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "You've made a mistake," Zira said, her voice holding a hint of amusement. "But it's not just any mistake." Jack opened his mouth to apologize, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "Among the Zarhak," she continued, "a mistake such as this can be seen as a challenge to the norms, to the expectations." Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made Jack's breath catch. "You have shown courage, human." Jack blinked, confused. "Courage, but I just knocked over." "I know what you did," she interrupted, "but you didn't apologize immediately. You didn't cower in fear, you simply stood there and looked at the consequences. In Zarhak culture, this is not a sign of weakness, but of strength." Jack was speechless. This wasn't what he had expected at all. He had assumed the worst, a reprimand, maybe even a scolding. Instead, Zira was treating the mistake like it was some kind of test. But what kind of test was this? And why did she find it so interesting? She smiled again, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "We don't often see humans stand up to us in this way. Most cower at the thought of offending us, but you," she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You've piqued my curiosity." Jack's heart raced. He didn't know how to respond. Everything he had been trained to do, every lesson he had learned about diplomacy and first impressions, seemed to be irrelevant here. In this world of alien traditions, his mistake had somehow set him apart. Before he could think of a proper response, Zira gestured to the fallen pedestal. "You'll fix it," she said simply, "and then we will see how you handle the rest of the tasks." The other Zarhak diplomats seemed to relax slightly, though their gazes remained fixed on Jack. With a mix of uncertainty and determination, Jack nodded. "Of course," he said, stepping forward to right the pedestal. But as his hands touched the metal, he felt a strange sense of connection. There was something about this moment, something about Zira's reaction that felt important. Like he had just crossed a line into a world he didn't fully understand, one where mistakes weren't punishments, but opportunities. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Jack Harrington. After the mishap with the pedestal, he had expected the Zarhak to lose interest in him, or at the very least, treat him like a child who had just broken something valuable. But instead, Zira seemed more intrigued by him than ever. She watched him closely during every step of his work, her eyes sharp and calculating, as though she was constantly analyzing him. Jack had thought that once he completed the repairs to the communication systems, his part in the mission would be over. But it seemed that Zira had other plans. She insisted on accompanying him during his work, standing by his side, observing him as he tinkered with the alien technology. Jack was used to working alone or with other engineers, but with Zira by his side, it was different. Her presence was overwhelming, for lack of a better word. She didn't just watch. She studied everything he did with an intensity that was almost unsettling. At first, Jack thought it was just part of her role as the leader of the delegation. But as the days went by, he realized that there was something more to it. She seemed genuinely fascinated by his every move, like she was trying to understand something about him that was beyond his skills as an engineer. "Human technology is crude," Zira said one afternoon, her voice soft but tinged with something that felt like amusement. "But it is effective in its own way. Your species is resourceful even if you lack the finesse of more advanced cultures." Jack chuckled nervously. "I wouldn't say crude. We've made a lot of advancements, especially in the last few centuries. We've just had to find new ways of making things work, sometimes through trial and error." Zira tilted her head, considering his words. "You speak of trial and error like it is an inevitability, but for the Zarhak, every action is deliberate, planned. We do not make mistakes like your species does." Jack froze for a moment. He remembered her words from the first day, the ones about courage and mistakes. At first, he had thought she was being sarcastic, but now he wasn't so sure. "I guess that's true for us," Jack said slowly. "But sometimes the mistakes we make are what lead us to the biggest discoveries. Maybe it's the same for you. No one's perfect." Zira's gaze softened for a brief moment, and for the first time, Jack saw something other than the cold, calculating leader he had come to expect. She seemed almost thoughtful, as if she were weighing something in her mind. "You may be right, human," she said after a pause, her voice quieter than before. "Perhaps there is value in your mistakes. Perhaps they are not as meaningless as I once believed." The exchange left Jack feeling more unsettled than ever. What was she trying to say? And why was she so fixated on his every word? It was as if she was trying to read him, to understand him in ways he couldn't comprehend. As the days passed, Jack found himself becoming increasingly aware of Zira's presence. It wasn't just during work anymore. She sought him out even when he wasn't in the middle of a task. She would join him for meals, sit next to him in silence, or engage him in conversations about human culture, asking questions he had never expected from an alien. She was curious about Earth, about humanity's values, history, and the very nature of what it meant to be human. One evening, after a particularly long day of repairs, Jack found himself sitting alone in his quarters, reviewing some of the technical data he had gathered. The door to his room slid open without warning, and he looked up to see Zira standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the soft blue light of the corridor outside. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said, her tone neutral, but there was something in her voice that suggested otherwise. "No, not at all," Jack replied quickly, standing up from his chair. "I was just finishing some work, but I'm done for the night. What's up?" Zira stepped into the room and glanced around. "I've been observing you, human," she said, her eyes sweeping over the room. "I find your species fascinating, so much potential in so many areas, yet so much unrefined." Jack wasn't sure how to respond. He had no idea what Zira saw when she looked at him. Did she see him as an experiment, a curiosity to be studied, or was she truly interested in what made them human? "You've mentioned that before," Jack said, leaning against the desk. "That we have potential, but we're unrefined. What do you mean by that?" Zira turned to face him, her eyes glinting with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "You have not mastered your own nature, Jack Harrington. Your species is unpredictable. You live on the edge of chaos, constantly fighting to tame it, to find order in the disorder. It is fascinating." Jack swallowed. He wasn't used to talking about humanity in such abstract terms. "I don't know if I'd say we're always fighting chaos, but I get what you mean. We don't always have the answers right away. We have to experiment, make mistakes, learn from them. And sometimes that's how we grow." Zira studied him closely for a moment, and then, to his surprise, she smiled, a rare, genuine smile that took him completely off guard. "Perhaps that is what makes you so intriguing. You embrace chaos in a way that no other species does." The conversation felt strange, almost surreal. Jack didn't know where it was heading or what Zira wanted from him. Was she genuinely fascinated by humanity, or was she trying to understand something about him specifically? The days blurred together, each one following the same routine. Jack worked on the communication systems with Zira by his side, offering occasional commentary or asking questions that made him pause and think. She would often ask about things that seemed trivial, yet her interest was so intense that Jack found himself responding in ways he never had before. But as the days turned into weeks, something started to feel off. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Zira's interest in him wasn't entirely professional. She was beginning to watch him, not just as an engineer, but as a person. He had never been one to shy away from attention, but this was different. This felt personal. One afternoon, as Jack was working on some technical adjustments to a communication relay, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to find Zira standing just a few feet away, her gaze fixed on him, her expression unreadable. "Is something wrong?" he asked, sensing the shift in the air. "You've been quiet lately." Zira didn't answer right away. She simply stared at him, her eyes searching as if looking for something hidden beneath the surface. "I've been thinking," she finally said, her voice low. "You are different from the others, different from the other humans I have met. You react to things in ways that others do not. Your species is more than what I expected." Jack was taken aback. He had expected some casual comment, maybe even an offhand remark about his work, but this was something entirely different. The way she said it, so thoughtfully, so deliberately, made it seem like she was trying to connect with him on a deeper level. "I don't know if I'm that different," Jack said, trying to keep his tone light. "I'm just doing my job." Zira didn't respond at first. She just stood there watching him, her intense gaze making Jack feel exposed in a way he couldn't fully explain. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "You may not realize it, Jack, but you've already changed things here. You've changed me." The days following Zira's cryptic statement lingered in Jack's mind, occupying his thoughts more than he cared to admit. Her words echoed in his ears long after she had left the room. "You've already changed things here. You've changed me." He couldn't stop wondering what she meant by that. Was she just trying to flatter him? Or was there something deeper, something that went beyond his skills as an engineer? At first, Jack had brushed it off. He had assumed that Zira's curiosity was a byproduct of her species' obsession with honor and strength. The Zarhak, as he had learned in the days he had spent with them, valued these qualities above all else. It made sense that she would be intrigued by his resilience, his willingness to adapt to challenges, even when he made mistakes. But as the days passed, he began to feel a different kind of weight in her gaze, a weight that suggested his role in this mission might be more significant than he had originally thought. The work on the communication systems continued, but Zira's presence had become more constant. She no longer just stood by his side during the repairs. She began engaging him in deeper conversations, questions about human values, history, and philosophy. She had already asked about Earth's technological advancements and the way humans overcame adversity. But now, she seemed to want to understand the very core of what it meant to be human. She probed his thoughts on loyalty, honor, and sacrifice, asking questions Jack had never considered. One evening, after another long day of work, Jack was walking through the corridors of the Zarhak facility when he saw Zira standing near one of the training chambers. She was staring at the intricate carvings on the walls, her expression distant. He wasn't sure if she even noticed him approach, but when she spoke, her voice was soft, as though she were thinking aloud. "Do you know what the Zarhak value most, Jack?" she asked without turning around. He had grown used to her sudden shifts in conversation, so he didn't hesitate. "Honor," he said, his voice steady. "You've mentioned it before." Zira turned to face him, her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him. "Yes, honor," she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. "But it is not just honor that we cherish, it is the test of honor. The trials that prove one's worth, one's ability to endure, to rise above others and claim their rightful place." Jack frowned, sensing that this was leading to something important. "A test of honor," Zira nodded slowly. "A challenge, a ritual that every Zarhak must face. It is a trial that proves whether a being is truly worthy of the title they hold. It is not something we take lightly." Jack felt a pang of unease. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't a leader. He was just a human engineer, here to help fix their equipment and maintain the systems they relied on. What could this test have to do with him? "Why are you telling me this?" Jack asked carefully, his voice betraying a hint of concern. "Because," Zira said, her gaze fixed on him, "I have decided to give you the opportunity to face it." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. "Wait, what? You want me to face this trial, but I'm not even," Zira interrupted him with a sharp gesture. "You are worthy," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made Jack pause. "You've shown courage, determination, and an ability to adapt that we rarely see. For the Zarhak, these qualities are more valuable than strength or skill with weapons. I want to see if you can prove what I already know about you." Jack was stunned. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't trained in combat, and he had no idea what this trial would entail. He had come here to repair systems, not to prove his worth in some ancient alien ritual. But there was something about Zira's words that resonated with him, something that made him wonder if this challenge was exactly what he needed. After all, wasn't the whole point of being human to face adversity and rise above it? "Okay," he said, swallowing his doubts. "What do I have to do?" Zira's smile was slight, but there was a flicker of something darker in her eyes. "The trial is a mental test. You will enter a shared psychic space with me. In this space, your deepest fears, desires, and regrets will manifest. You will face them and you must overcome them or you will fail." Jack's heart raced. A psychic trial? That sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but he wasn't about to back down. This was his chance to prove himself, to show the Zarhak and Zira that he wasn't just some naive human who didn't belong here. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I'll do it." Zira nodded approvingly. "Good, we begin tomorrow." The next day, Jack found himself standing in front of the training chamber, where Zira had instructed him to meet her. The room was dimly lit, filled with strange, pulsing energy fields that hummed softly, almost like the air itself was alive. He could feel a strange pressure building in the air, as if something unseen was watching him, waiting for him to make the first move. Zira was already there, standing at the center of the room, her posture rigid and poised. She looked calm, almost serene, but Jack knew that she was ready for whatever came next. "You're ready," she said, her voice firm. When you enter this space, you must trust me. Do not fight the trial. Let it unfold as it will. Only then will you truly understand what you're capable of. Jack nodded, though a part of him wanted to protest. What if the trial was too much? What if it was something he couldn't handle? But he pushed the doubts aside. This was his chance to prove himself, and he wasn't going to back down now. With a final glance at Zira, he stepped into the center of the room, his body tensing as the psychic field enveloped him. The world around him seemed to shift, the walls of the chamber fading into darkness. For a moment, he felt disoriented, as though the ground beneath him was no longer solid. And then, suddenly, it was as if everything clicked into place. The air felt thick with energy, and Jack felt his mind expanding, as though he was stepping into a vast, unknown space. He could feel Zira beside him, her presence a constant anchor in the shifting sea of thoughts and emotions. But it wasn't just her he could feel. The space was alive, filled with echoes of his own mind, his deepest fears, his past regrets, his insecurities. A dark figure materialized in front of him. It was a version of himself, but not quite. It was Jack as he had been years ago, weak, unsure, and filled with self-doubt. The figure spoke, its voice cold and mocking. "You think you belong here, human? You've done nothing but make mistakes. You're nothing more than an accident, a fluke. You'll never be strong enough to face us." Jack's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. This was his trial. His mind had conjured this version of himself for a reason. He was going to face it head-on. "No," Jack said, his voice steady. "I'm more than my mistakes. I've learned, I've grown, and I'm here because I belong." The figure laughed, a hollow sound that reverberated through the psychic space. But Jack didn't back down. He took a step forward, his resolve hardening. "This is who I am," he said, the words more for himself than for the figure. "And I'm not afraid anymore." With a burst of energy, the figure vanished, dissolving into nothingness. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. The trial wasn't just about confronting external threats. It was about confronting himself, accepting his flaws and his strength, and understanding that he didn't need to be perfect to be worthy. When the psychic space began to fade, Jack found himself back in the training room, his body trembling with the intensity of the experience. He looked at Zira, who stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "You passed," she said, her voice soft but filled with an unspoken pride. "You faced your fears, Jack. You didn't back down." Jack nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. He had faced the trial and come out the other side stronger. But more than that, he had faced the parts of himself he had always tried to hide, the doubts, the insecurities, and learned to accept them. Zira's gaze softened as she stepped closer. "You are worthy, human," she said quietly. "You are more than I expected." Jack looked up at her, his heart still racing from the trial, but now with a newfound sense of understanding. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The following days felt strangely quiet after the trial. Jack had expected to feel a sense of triumph or relief, but instead, a quiet tension lingered in the air between him and Zira. He had passed the trial, but in a way, it felt like the real test was only just beginning. He had confronted his own fears and doubts, but the future of his relationship with the Zarhak and with Zira herself seemed more uncertain than ever. Jack found himself thinking about Zira more than he cared to admit. She had always been a mystery to him, a person of immense power and authority who had somehow chosen to involve him in the complexities of Zarhak culture. But now, after the trial, something had shifted. He had seen another side of her, something vulnerable, something human. He had always thought of her as an alien, someone who would never understand the struggles and hopes of humanity. But now, after sharing that moment in the psychic space, Jack began to realize that perhaps they weren't so different after all. He had gained the respect of the Zarhak, but at what cost? His accidental mistake, which had started it all, now seemed like the catalyst for something much larger. He was no longer just a human engineer here on a diplomatic mission. He was part of something deeper, something that went beyond mere repair work. One evening, Jack found himself standing outside the main council chamber, where the Zarhak leaders had gathered. He had been summoned to join Zira, and though he wasn't sure why, he had learned by now that when Zira called, he didn't have much choice but to obey. He had begun to accept that his presence here was no longer just about fixing machines. It was about something far greater, though he still couldn't put his finger on what it was. As Jack entered the council room, the mood was noticeably different. The usual formalities were in place, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The council members, who had once looked at him with curiosity and even some disdain, were now watching him carefully. Zira stood at the center of the room, her posture as poised and regal as ever. But this time there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something that Jack couldn't quite name. "Jack," Zira said, her voice calm but commanding. "We are about to discuss an important matter, and I need you to be here as a part of the decision." Jack's brow furrowed. "A decision? What's going on?" Zira looked at him, and for a brief moment there was something almost apologetic in her gaze. "The time has come to consider the future of our alliance with humanity. Some of the council believe it is time to formalize our relationship with your species, to give humans a greater role in the affairs of the galaxy." Jack blinked, surprised by the gravity of her words. "A greater role, but I thought the mission was just about technology, helping you with repairs, nothing more." "The situation has changed," Zira said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "The council has been watching you, Jack. Watching how you interact with us, with the other species. There are those who believe that your humanity, your unpredictability, your courage could offer something that no other species can." Jack's heart began to race. "You mean?" "They're considering giving humans a bigger role in the galaxy? But how? We're not even close to being on the same level as the Zarhak or other advanced species. We've barely scratched the surface of interstellar travel." Zira gave him a small, knowing smile. "That is precisely the point. Your species has something others lack, something raw, untapped. And some of the council believe that it could be used to our advantage. A new force in the galaxy, one that could challenge the established order, one that could bring change." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Jack felt a sudden surge of anxiety. He had never signed up for any of this. He had come to this planet to help with repairs, to bridge the gap between two species, but now it seemed like his actions, his very presence, were being viewed as the catalyst for something much bigger, something dangerous. "But I'm not a politician, Zira," Jack said, his voice quiet. "I'm just an engineer. I don't know anything about galactic politics or power struggles. I'm not qualified to make these kinds of decisions." Zira stepped closer, her gaze intense. "That is exactly why you are needed. You see, the decision is not entirely in the hands of the council. There are factions within our ranks, factions that disagree on the direction our people should take. Some believe that humanity is too dangerous to be trusted with more power. Others believe that you are the key to ushering in a new era, and your actions, your choices, will play a significant role in deciding which path we take." Jack shook his head, feeling overwhelmed. He had never wanted to be a part of this. He had never asked for this kind of responsibility. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his accidental mistake had already set things in motion, and now it was too late to back out. Before he could respond, one of the council members, an older Zarhak named Taller, spoke up. His voice was deep and gravelly, filled with authority. "This human is not fit to make decisions about the future of the Zarhak or any other species," Taller said, his eyes fixed on Jack with a disdain that made Jack's skin crawl. "He is an outsider. He has not earned our trust, and his kind, humans, are unpredictable. We cannot place our future in the hands of something so volatile." There was a murmur of agreement among several of the council members. Jack could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. But then Zira spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "That is where you are wrong, Taller," she said, her tone firm and unwavering. "Jack Harrington may not be a Zarhak, but he has something that we cannot ignore. His species may be unpredictable, but it is that very unpredictability that gives them strength. You speak of trust, but what is trust without the willingness to change, to take risks? Humanity has shown time and again that it can adapt, that it can rise above challenges in ways that no other species has." Taller sneered, clearly unimpressed. "And you would have us place our future in the hands of someone so human?" Zira turned to Jack, her gaze softening slightly. "You may not understand it, Jack, but the council is divided. Some believe that humanity should be given the chance to prove itself, while others feel that you are too dangerous, too unpredictable. The decision is not easy." Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had come here to help repair a communication system, not to become the deciding factor in a galactic political struggle. But as he looked at Zira, he realized that this was bigger than just him. This was about the future of humanity, about what role they would play in the galaxy. "I don't have the answers, Zira," Jack said quietly, his voice steady but uncertain. "I'm just one person. I don't know how to solve this." Zira stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That is why you are needed," she said softly. "You may not have all the answers, but your humanity, your ability to embrace uncertainty, may be exactly what we need to change the course of our future." Jack nodded, though the weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. His actions had set something in motion, something that would have consequences not just for him, but for humanity as a whole. The council meeting continued, but Jack's mind was elsewhere, lost in thought. He had come here to fix a broken communication system, but now it seemed like the very fate of the galaxy might rest on his shoulders. It was a terrifying thought, and yet, as he looked at Zira, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose. She believed in him, believed that humanity had something worth fighting for. And for the first time since his arrival, Jack wondered if she was right. The days that followed the council meeting felt like a whirlwind of emotions and uncertainty. Jack had become an unexpected figure at the heart of a growing political and cultural storm. After Zira's declaration that humanity's future might hinge on his actions, Jack found himself constantly pulled between the forces of caution and ambition. The council was divided, and both sides saw something in him, a symbol of humanity's potential or a dangerous unknown. But Jack had never asked for any of this. He had come to the Zarhak system simply to fix a communication system, and now he was being asked to make decisions that could alter the course of galactic history. Every time he stepped into a room, he felt the weight of expectation pressing on him. The Zarhak leaders no longer saw him as just an engineer. They saw him as something more, a key figure in their political future. To some, he was a bridge between humanity and the stars. To others, he was an unpredictable variable, a threat to the stability they had worked for millennia to maintain. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Jack had always prided himself on his ability to stay focused, to solve problems, but this was something different. The fate of entire species, maybe even galaxies, rested on decisions that weren't entirely his own. Yet, in the middle of it all, one question haunted him. What did he truly want? It had been a week since the council meeting, and Jack's role had only become more complicated. Zira, ever the calm and composed leader, continued to guide him through the turbulent political landscape. Her presence, once comforting, now carried a subtle weight, a constant reminder of the responsibility that lay before him. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Jack found himself walking the corridors of the Zarhak facility. The air was thick with tension. He had just left a session with the council, where the debate over humanity's place in the galaxy had grown more heated. There were those who wanted to embrace humanity as a partner, and those who saw humans as too dangerous to be trusted. His thoughts were interrupted when he turned a corner and found Zira waiting for him by a balcony that overlooked the planet below. The sight was breathtaking: vast blue oceans, golden plains, and towering mountains, all bathed in the light of two setting suns. But even the beauty of the scene couldn't quiet the unease building in Jack's chest. "Zira," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't know what to do. There are so many different voices in the council, so many opinions. I don't even know if I'm the right person to make this decision. I'm just one guy. I'm not a diplomat. I don't know how to play these games." Zira didn't immediately respond. She simply stared out at the horizon, her expression unreadable. Jack wondered what she was thinking. The silence stretched on until finally she turned to face him, her eyes reflecting a depth he couldn't fully understand. "You are not just one guy, Jack," she said softly. "You are the person who has given us something we've been searching for: hope. Hope that there is more to the universe than what we know. Hope that change is possible, and even if you do not realize it, you have already chosen your path. The choices you make from this point forward will shape everything that comes after." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he was leaning on Zira, how much her belief in him had become a foundation he didn't want to lose. But now, hearing her speak so seriously about the weight of his decisions, he wasn't so sure. The pressure was unbearable, and the last thing he wanted was to be responsible for a decision that could cost lives or, worse, destroy an entire future. "I don't feel like I've done anything special," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I've just been trying to survive, trying to get through each day. I never asked for any of this. I didn't ask to be the one to make the call on humanity's place in the galaxy. Zira's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jack saw something vulnerable in her eyes. It was a fleeting look, quickly masked by her usual composure, but it was enough to make his heart ache. "I know," she said quietly. "But sometimes, Jack, the universe doesn't give us a choice. It places us in situations we never expected, and all we can do is find the strength to rise to the occasion." Jack stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. He had always believed in the power of choice, in the ability to control his own destiny. But here, on the edge of something so much bigger than himself, it felt like that power was slipping away. He had no idea what to choose, whether to align with the Zarhak, to stand apart, or to find a path that was uniquely his own. He didn't know where to turn. "I can't do it alone," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to," Zira replied, stepping closer. "You've already made your choice. It's not about whether you're ready or not, it's about whether you're willing to face what comes next. And you don't have to decide it all at once. You have time. But know this, Jack, the decision you make will change everything. And it will change you too." Jack felt a strange mixture of fear and clarity settle over him. Zira was right. This was bigger than just him. It was bigger than his own doubts, his own hesitations. The choices he made now would affect not just the Zarhak, not just humanity, but the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The truth was, he wasn't the one who had set these events in motion. It had been the universe, the very stars themselves, that had thrust him into this place. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the horizon, trying to calm his racing mind. The decision was his, but it wasn't just his alone. He had to think about the future of humanity, about what kind of legacy they would leave in the galaxy. If they were going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the stars, they needed to be more than just a curious species. They needed to be brave. They needed to be willing to challenge the status quo. But was that enough? Was it enough to simply be human, to carry the strength of their potential and their courage? Would the galaxy accept them, or would they be crushed by the weight of their own inexperience? Jack looked at Zira, who stood silently beside him, watching him closely. She was waiting for him to make a decision, waiting for him to choose. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jack said finally, his voice steady. "About humanity having something others don't, something raw, untapped. Maybe that's true. Maybe our unpredictability, our willingness to make mistakes, is something we can use. We may not have the finesse or the wisdom of older species, but we have something that can't be replicated." Zira nodded slowly, her eyes gleaming with approval. "Yes. That is what I see in you, Jack. That is what I see in humanity, and that is why I've stood by you through all of this. Because you and your people have the potential to change everything." The weight on Jack's shoulders lifted slightly. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time since he had arrived in the Zarhak system, he felt like he was beginning to understand his place in all of this. It wasn't about being perfect, about having a clear, easy path. It was about making the best decision with what he had, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice stronger now. "I'll help humanity find its place in the galaxy. We may not be perfect, but we have the strength to grow, and we'll prove it." Zira's smile was small but full of pride. "Then it is done," she said. "The choice has been made, and with it you have taken the first step toward a future that is yours to shape." Jack took a deep breath, the realization settling in. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and opposition. But it was also filled with possibilities, and he would face them not alone, but with humanity's courage at his back. As they stood together, looking out at the stars, Jack knew that the universe had just become a little bit smaller. And for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.